We are officially live, of course, here with none other than S.C. Mendes, longtime publisher for Bloodbound Books. So thank you very, very much for being here with us all today. I really appreciate that, man. And for everybody watching, you guys are in for a huge, really rare treat here because, I mean, you've been really focused on publishing, quite frankly, some of the best voices in the horror business, certainly with speculative horror and extreme horror. And not to gloss over the amazing voices that you publish, but the reason we're all here today, and I'm really excited, Essie, is because you're doing what a lot of publishers either, frankly, they don't have the balls to do, or they just don't do it, which is, of course, breaking down that fourth wall, ripping apart those proverbial curtains, not the ones behind you because you don't want to see the bodies, but ripping apart the proverbial curtains and showing us the nuts and bolts of what it looks like behind the scenes and helping all of us understand what we need to do to sell more books so we can write more books. Kind of get the ball rolling here. With the understanding that, of course, every book is different as far as reader response, general impact. Can you give us an idea of the average books that are sold, maybe with a mention of kind of the lower end of the sales numbers to maybe the lower end? And to add to that, is there much of a difference that you find with initial sales in full novels versus novellas when you're reviewing your average sales numbers on a month-to-month basis?
Sure, yeah. So I guess I also don't want to put any authors on blast at all, so I'll probably talk in generalities as best that I can. But in terms of, I don't always see, well, first, novels compared to maybe collections you had mentioned, right? In sales, like a length of a book or so. I would say that collections have been harder for us to sell. Novels are a little bit easier. We're trying to go for our number now for pre-order is about 76 books. That's kind of been the one to hit. And that number comes from a lot of times when it's an author who's more well-known and has a bigger catalog. And that's something that I definitely am going to put in when we talk about the lifespan of a book, how they're received. So if we can get between 76 and now we want to be shooting for 100 pre-orders, that would be great. Obviously, that'd be very difficult for an author, though, who doesn't have a following already, who isn't known. So it can vary. We work with a lot of first-time authors, and on those, maybe you get 15 pre-orders. So I can't say that there's one number that we're shooting for, but I think we know when we talk to the author, we kind of know already what their mailing list looks like, what their following is, how many books they've put out, and then we kind of put them into one of our categories. Not that we're going to treat them any differently, but just that we know what's more reasonable to expect, I would say. As far as sales go, that first month and leading up to it is always the biggest. That's like most important. So, I've seen when we do the pre-order, there's like it comes in waves. So a lot of times when the first pre-order is announced, you have all the excitement. A lot of people buy it right then and there. And it's really important to also have at the same time set up a Goodreads page. So that if you send out anything for, arcs and early reviews, those can be put on the Goodreads. And then people who are going to pre-order can actually see that. So if we can put our book up maybe 3 months before and have a Goodreads page, now as we get some early reviews, we can make another announcement on social media or in our newsletter, and we might see a peak in those pre-orders again. So it'll come in a wave, right? The first announcement, something. The next announcement, you have 10 reviews already on Goodreads. So that will show a peak up. And then we try to look for that first month is usually the best in sales. After that first month, a lot of times, books can, I don't want to say die, but they go down drastically, depending on what the author and the publisher does next.
I think that's so important to put that layer of reality on expectations, because of course I've heard different things where great advice is, fantastic, you're going to publish a book, keep your day job. I've also heard, fantastic, you're going to publish a book, expect about 200 sales on average kind of thing. So I think it's really important to have that layer of reality factored in there so that folks can, kind of plan their future and plan their next steps accordingly.
Yeah, I guess I would want to mention, I've heard that too. I've heard people say, no, the average independent book sells only 200 copies. And we have had a couple that have done that, and usually it's from an author who kind of put one out and then didn't do anything else. So they had a lot of short stories and they wanted to release a novel, and they do the novel and it's like, oh, it was great. It's like, wow, you had 200 sales. Well, that's pretty good. Now we're talking to some people, right? They're moving thousands and thousands of books, but suddenly they're like, okay, well, what's next? It just tapers off because people that enjoyed it are ready to buy the next thing by you, and there's nothing there. And then if you wait another 5 or 6 years to put out another book, that's kind of going to kill it and you have to restart over again. So I think the 200 does sound reasonable to expect.
Okay. And what would you say, kind of factors into, the most, or what would you say factors the most into those initial sales totals and how long those numbers sustain themselves for? You kind of touched a little bit on that. I'd love to get some more details on that.
Yeah. So the things that you can do can sustain it. Obviously, I really do think that after the pre-order, just from enough books, once that first month is done, you have to have some way to pick it back up. So things that could help, I think authors have to find a way to amplify their voice. Whatever that means, you need help in doing this. Me and my business partner, Joe Spagnuolo, we joke around. We want this year to be our beyond the 5,000. So if you look at Facebook, you're covered to like 5,000 friends, right?
Right.
That's really, how does your voice get out more than that? What else are you doing to amplify it? We know from the algorithms that even if I put a post up on Facebook, sometimes I'm lucky if I even have 30 likes on it, right? So that's only 30 of my 5,000. If you have 5,000, maybe you have a lot less. So the big question is, how do you amplify that? Ways to do it would be through newsletters. So an author should have their own newsletter. And we have talked about treating the people on your newsletter like royalty. Because they're really there. They are the direct contact that you have with your readers. So we have let our newsletter for Bloodbound Books over the years kind of ebb and flow. I didn't realize how important it was until more recently. So for example, if Amazon doesn't like your cover or something else is going on, you might get buried, or maybe they're not recommending your book. Every time you sell something too, by the way, Amazon is keeping all that information, or Barnes and Noble, or whoever you're selling through, right, your third party. You never get any of that information. So if you get a reader's email and they enjoy your book, you want to keep in touch with them. You don't want to overly spam them, but you want to keep up to date on what you're doing, what's exciting, what's going on. I talked to one author, since he is not a publishing company, obviously, it's just him. He will only do about 5 to 6 for the entire year, but they're big ones, and they're engaging, so he finds a newsletter to do that. Some of the other things that you can do, are paid promotion, and this is using other people's newsletters. So things like, written word media, I don't know if you've heard of them before, or BookBub.
Yeah.
Okay. So those would be newsletter sites. They've already gathered emails. Now again, there are ways to access those emails so that you can have them. I can get into later if you want to ask me, but you might just pay $15 or $20 so that they can shoot something out to their readers who are honed in on horror. So if you do thrillers, if you do mystery, if you do action adventure, romance, whatever genre you are in, they have accumulated a list. Now, the more emails they've gotten, like the book club, you can't just buy those. You have to apply, and they're going to vet you. And so it's really important that you're giving them your best work, but they'll hit a lot of people out. We've had book clubs that have moved 10,000 copies before,
Oh, wow.
Granted, they were either 99 cents or free, so you don't necessarily see the money. Granted, they were either 99 cents or free, and now they can follow you on Amazon, they can look for you in other places, and maybe you can connect, but that's a huge way of boosting those sales. The other thing that you want to do within the first month or 2 months, and these should all be done in waves, which we can talk about later, is getting books to influencers. And everyone's got different ideas on this. Maybe your idea is not influencers. I tend to like doing that, and I know it's a horrible term that people sometimes don't like, but really, what is it? These are people who go on the internet and talk about books they love, right? Like, that's exactly what authors are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
It is very difficult to, I send out books all the time to these people. Sometimes they do like them, sometimes they don't. what's it cost me? $7? A couple bucks for the book, a couple bucks for media mail. If they love it, they talk about it, and you've essentially paid for advertising for $7 to $14. You've gotten like an ad on TikTok. You've gotten an ad on Instagram. You didn't have to do anything. It's real. That's the most important part, is that it's real. So we'll send out like a ton of books. So like all in December, I sent out books, and then suddenly in January, end of January, every day I'm getting like tags, right? And someone new is saying, oh, I got this book from Bloodbound Books. I just finished this one. I loved it. All of a sudden, for like a week straight, you're getting tags about your book from the 20 different influencers that you sent it to, right? And then that wave goes down again, and you wait. And probably your sales are going to pick up because all of a sudden you've got all these things on social media. That's amplified your voice because there's no way you could have reached as many people. Also, there's no way I want to get in front of a camera and talk about books. I'm actually not very good at it, despite being on the podcast, despite my best trying, right? I don't do well at that. Also, a lot of the books that I read are no longer in the horror realm. Like, when I want to read, it's like, oh, just talk to everyone about the books you're reading on your own. Well, I'm reading nonfiction now because for my day job, I'm reading horribly brutal graphic books all the time, or taut suspenseful thrillers. I go through tons of short stories. I go through tons of submissions. So at the end of the day, I no longer want to get and make content and do that. I want to read a very nice book. Maybe I want to read a spirituality book. Maybe I want to do something on the history of Rome or ancient Greece. I don't actually want to, and it turns out that the people that follow me don't actually want me to tell them about ancient Greece or ancient Rome either. They want to, right? They're not there for that. So we're working together. So I think those three ways are ways that you can amplify your voice. And I know I rattled on. So again, it's newsletters that are your own. It'd be amplifying through promotional newsletters that you actually pay for, not an exorbitant fee. It doesn't have to be BookBub. And then the third would be influencers, or you could also go with, just people that you know in Books of Horror groups, right? So they have that Books of Horror preview. I know that we're both probably in that one. And we offer a book for free. Usually it's digital, because unless they have an Instagram account or a TikTok, there really isn't a need for them to have the physical copy because they're not doing that. But you can just contact those people. I talked recently to John Durgan on our podcast Horror Business, and he said he gave out about 50 of those, and then he saw it shoot up again. Got a whole lot of reviews in on Amazon when he sent out 50 books, and then all of a sudden the sales also start to mimic that. So those are the three ways I would say to amplify your voice to continue sales. So,
I mean, everybody watching this, I really hope that they're taking notes, that they're winding it, they're watching it back again. This stuff is absolute gold, and it's stuff that most publishers, for one reason or another, just aren't talking about. This is great. Now, you might have stolen the thunder from a question that I was thinking about asking you as well, Leslie, which was, I mean, if you had to put a finger on the most critical points in the book sales cycle, I was kind of wondering, like, where exactly would you be stabbing your digits on that cycle? But it really sounds like it's all of it. It's there's several beats to kind of making up that whole, lyric, if you will.
I would think the pre-launch is actually one of the most important. And it would mean having all of your channels like set and ready to go, if that makes sense. And I guess I did touch on it a little bit, but have that cover early on. If you have the cover, you can have a good read. There was a lot of times when I'm not going to lie and say I still completely understand Goodreads, but for years, that wasn't the platform I was on. And so magically one day our book would appear there. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And people would start adding it, but it was never something that I added personally myself there. But if you can get it added there ahead of time, that's a huge step. So number one, having the pre-order up on wherever it's going to be. So if you have your own website, make sure you have pre-order links up there. Make sure you have a landing page. A landing page should have, I can maybe send you a link to one of mine and you can drop it in the video, but it's going to have, a tagline, picture of the book, the synopsis, a whole lot of early reviews that you've got, links on where everyone can pre-order, and then that goes to your Amazon page. So then you've got the Amazon page set up where you can have that pre-ordered, or maybe they can even pre-order physical on your website. Then you have a Goodreads, and you're giving out early reviews to probably influencers and to ARC readers so that they can populate your Goodreads page. This way, that on release day number 1, you've maybe sold your 75 pre-orders, right? So authors haven't done this before. Pre-orders are bought, but they don't populate, or you don't really see them until the day of the official release, and then it goes out to everybody's Kindle. And this is assuming we're talking about a Kindle pre-order. So you've got your 75 jump up. All of a sudden, your ARC readers have left you maybe 10 to 15 reviews, hopefully at least, on Goodreads. And now you can say, hey, Amazon's up. Could you please copy those over? So now you can get your 10, 15 reviews right away on Amazon. You have them immediately or within the first week, hopefully, and you're all set up. That, I think, is super important almost before anything else. If you have a week launch, you're always playing catch up. It just becomes more difficult to set it up. You almost have to have a re-release, if that makes sense. So really making sure you've got everything set before you launch at all.
From what I understand, SC, Amazon loves positive responses. From what I understand, the pre-orders are so important as well because it shows, hey, on the first day, this book is so popular, it sold this many books, so we're now going to pull all the readers into this that we think would be interested based on the type of book this is. And all the reviews as they come in, it's like, oh, there's more positive stuff. So again, Amazon's going to pull all those eyeballs and to their recommended features and say, hey, if you like this book, you're probably going to love this book that Bloodbound Publishing Bloodbound Books just published. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I by no means understand the algorithm, but that is what I can tell on my end too. So for example, when the 75 pre-order copies, they all hit that day, you've now sold 75 books in one day. You are probably going to be launched to the top of whatever category you were in. So for example, you're in apocalyptic horror because now they have ways of doing subgenres. Boom, you're like number one in it. I would also tell authors, grab a screenshot of that. People always love it. It's like, oh wow, look, you made it to number one, right? So you grab the screenshot, you now have something that shows you're the number one in your category on that first day. That's another piece of like marketing tools that you can use later. You can show it. Maybe you'll only be number one for the day, or maybe you've only jumped up to number 25, but absolutely. And I will say that Amazon, for some of the aggravations we have that they keep the data, they do an amazing job of marketing for you. I do think authors should be on Amazon. I know my wife, my friends, all of a sudden they're like, hey dude, I heard you're putting out another book. I'm like, I didn't even tell you about it yet. No, Amazon put it out. They said SC's got another pre-order, or one of our authors do, because we always also put Bloodbound Books. So maybe a book would be written by, Aaron Thomas Milstead for Earworm, but it's also been edited or published by Bloodbound Books. So we have our own page there too. One of the goals of that is if people have followed Bloodbound Books, our hope is that every author we publish now gets that same love from Amazon.
Especially authors that maybe have a couple of books sort of on deck and they're ready to roll out with it. How important, SC, would you say it is for authors to be able to time, their releases so that they aren't necessarily competing with their own books, so they can actually ensure that they get as much longevity as possible, as far as continuing sales go. And I was just wondering if there's maybe a sweet spot for how much time there actually is in between, first release, second release, so on, for getting the best games out of their overall sales cycle.
Absolutely. Man, I had like a firm answer for this. You had asked me maybe like 3 years ago. I think the world it changes so fast now, right? It used to be like we'd have books like, and I'll use this author's name because we've already joked about that he is the machine. Christopher Triano is always writing, right? Always writing. And he's got books that we've had him on. He says, some are better for Bloodbound, some are better here. Now that he's built up his following, he's doing a lot on his own now. Now he knows how to do some of them, which I think for authors is a fantastic move. We can talk another time about whether you want to self-publish or work with a publisher, and I have ideas on that. Even being a publisher, a lot of people, I say they self-publish. But to your real question, I would say, look, man, we don't want to put this out yet. Like, we've already got your book here. You really want to fight against yourself, like if we're promoting Body Art and then, it's another great press, Lori Michelle does it, Ghoulish Books, with Max Booth, and I can't think of their actual name now, maybe it's not Ghoulish Books, but we would put something out with them, like, you might be fighting against each other, or what if you want to go for an award? I don't see that as much anymore now, because I think the way media has been distributed and the way that we consume content, a lot of people want to binge. That's what they enjoy. And so if an author is releasing a book, I would say, oh my gosh, man, you gotta wait at least 6 more months before you have the next book. I can't say that that's the case anymore. The only thing maybe is fighting against yourself if you really care that much about awards, because obviously you probably can't win a Splatterpunk or a Shirley Jackson or a, Bram Stoker. You can't get multiples, right? So you'd have to just pick one of your books would win if you were going to win. But other than that, I would still I wouldn't do more than, or less than 3 months, because I really think that 3-month lead-in is great for the pre-orders and everything. So if you've just done the 3 months for your last book, you're in the process of, so there's like a cycle. As you're launching your next book, you're probably behind the scenes getting the next one ready. I would say still 3 to probably 5 months. You don't have to wait longer. I don't think there's any reason why you can't do 3 books in a year anymore. So, and if you're doing a series, I can tell you the exact wrong way to do a series. I think with a series, people really want, though, to have that next book right away. You should have it in the wings or ready to go. Any more than a book a year, I think is way too long. I think you should be doing 2 or 3 of the books. And I'm almost changing my answer as I'm saying it out loud, right? Because I'm trying to go back through instances. And another interesting way, I'm going to use Chris again. Partnerships or collaborations, right? So like, even if I put out a book by me, S.C. Mendes, I could get together with another author. So like me and Nikki Noor might put something out even just a month later. But it's kind of different because I'm working with someone else. So I know Chris has done a novel, and then he does the obituaries, right? With like, it's Aaron Beauregard and Daniel Volpe, right? And then he'll also have maybe like a story coming out in an anthology. So you can have a novel and then follow it up real quick with another maybe collaboration that you do with someone else or something that's slightly different. But I really don't see them hindering it the way I used to see it. The only thing that I would take into consideration for it is the money you're going to be investing in the book, I guess, and thinking about the timeline of which you have to roll it out. I think those more come into play than inundating and fighting against yourself for a release. I just don't see it anymore. So I don't think authors need to really wait longer than 4 months. I mean, if they're ready to go with the next book in 4 months and they've got the whole system set up in the pre-order, they should go with it.
Cool. All right. Much appreciated. And I'll give you an opportunity as well to maybe even change your answer again by throwing a couple maybe different factors at you as well, because we're really seeing, I find anyways, a real influx of novellas, which a lot of folks argue that that's the perfect length for a taut horror tale, and I'm certainly one of those guys as well, but I think I certainly believe that to be true. But as a new author that's fighting to dig in their heels and, build that audience do you think it makes more sense then to write more, smaller works such as novellas as opposed to having, maybe fewer novels out? Obviously depends on how fast you can write those novels out. Or do you think there's other factors to consider that would make either of those approach more ideal for sales and audience growth, which I know are very different things, but I'll kind of congeal to be important together.
Yeah, absolutely. I will go back and amend my previous answer. You can cut it or you can keep it all in, however you think is best. But,
sure.
Yes, that's the other thing, as you mentioned, so many important factors. So I want people just right now to pause and be like, okay, just because I started this in 2009, I'm telling you what we did in 2014 even couldn't even work now. And for each author, there's so many variables that you have to take into account. So one of them, for when you want to release, you were saying like, how long should you wait? Are you fighting against each other? It also depends on your back catalog. That is also going to factor in. So, when you very first asked me what could be the rise in sales, right? Like, when does it start to taper off and die? Well, certain things will prevent it from dying. Maybe a book will start to die, but if you have a great, jump on one book, having a back catalog built up is super important. All of a sudden, you might see sales on a book that came out 7 years ago start to shoot up through the roof because people are finding now oh wow, I found this person. I want to read more of them. they go devour your backlog, your back catalog. If that makes sense. So all your old titles that you weren't being seen love, now all of a sudden they are. So those sales are being boosted up by what you're doing currently. So the back catalog is very, very important. To address your question about novellas, I do think that the novellas, the short, quick bites, are super important. Of course, it matters what genre you're in, but those are great way to get new readers in. I think that a lot of times with attention spans, this is a broad stroke, right? I'm going to talk about overall.
Sure.
I think a lot of people want those quick, fun, exciting, fast reads. There's nothing wrong with the doorstop book. You know, everyone's got their big tunes, high epic fantasies. But I think those are maybe more like readers. And what I've seen in the horror genre right now, I hope I'm not stealing too much of it for later, but we have seen a lot of, almost cult-like excitement over really graphic or really shocking stuff that comes out. It's almost very reminiscent of the 80s when we talked about the movies, the video nasties that are banned in all these countries. Suddenly you can be banned and be like, oh, it's great. It was only a 50-page book. I loved it. I'm ready for his next one. So there's those things to factor in too. But I think if you could write some novellas that for most people are easier because they have less characters. They're shorter. Maybe the plots are, I don't want to say they're not as intricate because you still want to deliver a very powerful plot and character development. But if you have the skills to do that in shorter work, I would say definitely those are powerful to release. Those are also good to intersperse or however you want to see if you have longer books. They're also great if you want to build a connection with readers. So how do you build your newsletter? One of the ways is to give away free stuff. You have to find a way to get people to sign up. So if you have a novella that's really great, maybe it's reaching the end of its lifespan, you're not really seeing a lot of new sales on the channels, give it away to people for free in exchange for an email address so you can keep in touch with them. I'm assuming most people will say, I'd rather give away my 20,000 word novella than my 200,000 word epic novel that I've poured everything in. I mean, it's not to take away anything from a novella, because some of my favorite books are novellas, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at your time and the money for the time, you really have to decide. But I do think that novellas are a great way to go. I remember talking with Daniel Volpe at AuthorCon 3, and this even comes into the pricing. This is why there's not just a clear cut, people want one answer. He was telling me he was selling his books, and again, I'm almost positive they were $10. I'm like, whoa, I try to do that when it's unsigned, but I'm like, how are you doing that if it was signed, and, or how are you doing that in so many? He goes, well, honestly, a lot of my books are novellas, so they're shorter length. Not all of his are, but they're shorter. This suddenly allows people to have a much more approachable price point, right? So if you want to get new readers in, maybe you can also move that a little bit. You can give them a signed book that's only $10 because it is a novella, and you feel very comfortable with that, and you still met your cost. The reader's getting value, and you're still making paying your bills. Whereas a bigger book, you're like, gosh, I really can't do that. So maybe you can also do that with the ebook, because the file size also matters. How you compress it, how big the file is. Maybe you can sell that book for $2.99, where you might have to sell your bigger books for $4.99. So I think novellas are a great way to go. Those savings can be passed on to the consumer, to the reader. I hope that helps a little bit too, but I know it gave everyone a lot more questions.
Well, I think half the battle of figuring this stuff out is asking the right questions, because it is so individualized. I mean, you're laying all this great information out, and it really is up to people to decide for themselves how all this information fits in with what they want to do, what they want to get out of their writing career. So I think that's fantastic. One thing that I'd love to know as well, that I think no matter how successful you are, there's just going to be a point where sales start to slow down a bit for, again, any number of reasons. But what, if anything, can an author actually do to help breathe life into a book's success if the sales have either dropped off or failed to launch straight out of the gates that you've seen work? And maybe what factors do you think went into making that work?
So it could definitely be a couple things right off the bat. And I guess the first thing I would say is, if you are going to be a career author, and let's also explain what that means. There are so many authors that are famous authors who are writing, and they're still working some kind of job, right? Like they're still a professor, they're still teaching, they still do copy editing on the side for companies. So that doesn't mean they're not a career. So I don't want you to think like, right? But if you are putting out books even if you're doing once a year, you will automatically have that boost, right? Because I said the back catalog is super important. In fact, until you have about 10 books built up in your back that readers can go right to, you're probably going to struggle with that. Things are going to start to fail a little bit. Or not fail, that's the wrong word, but they taper off. So that's the first thing. You're going to have that on it because remember, you're talking to your readers. You're about to have the next book, and they're going to go back and buy it for the new people. But other things could be, okay, here's an easy one. Cover. I've had a lot of covers that are hit or miss. I see an awesome one on your bookshelf right now that was a total miss, but it is an amazing book. It was called Earworm, who I talked about later, Aaron Thomas Milstead. This was a fantastic book. The original cover for it was the best intentions. It was exactly the author and I wanted. We wanted a subliminal message that made a picture. So we had subliminal words that were used in the book that created the picture, the outline of a woman. It was on white. The words were a little too gray. It didn't pop. It didn't do what we thought it was going to do. It was exactly what we asked for. And so unfortunately, that one really killed it. It was a fantastic book. It was coming out right before COVID. So, people were online and it didn't translate on the online picture to the buying of it. And so one thing that we did recently is we bought a new cover. We did a whole new redesign of the cover and we're going to relaunch it now. I'm in the process of doing what I told you already, sending it out to influencers, and I'm hoping that in the next month, it's going to start to have an increase in sales. Unfortunately, I can't go back and undo, like it's only going to have the 8 reviews it has now, it has what it sold already. It's just new edition. If something totally fails, you're like, man, I don't understand, I thought this was my best effort, what went wrong? Maybe the reviews, if there's something consistent in all of them, try to pick that out and then do your second edition. There's nothing wrong with coming up with a second edition. Sometimes readers in the indie world are like, oh my gosh, I don't understand. Why do you have 3 or 4 different covers for the book? Why is it this way? I'm like, look at any mainstream or successful author. How many covers are there for it? How many times has that book been republished? I mean, it gets picked up, right? It has a run, and then it goes out, and then the next publisher picks it up and does a run and revitalizes it, right? So there's nothing wrong with doing that, but figure out what it was. So was it the cover? Was it something about the content? Did you have some of the books you talked about that have gone totally viral before? These books they went viral for whatever the reason, but the original, it was full of errors. There was problems with it. It wasn't formatted great because it was done a long, long time ago. And they had the file, but they never actually updated it. They just kept doing more with social media. So finally it gets picked up, it goes viral, but then people are like, oh, I don't really like this, or sorry, I should see what they're doing well. It's been fixed, and so when it's viral, people are buying the newer version of it. They're buying the one with all the fixes, maybe. So definitely go through, find out if there's something in the reviews that you should change. I'm trying to also see what would be another reason for a book's failure. Besides it just didn't get noticed, right? It didn't, here's a huge one. Distribution. We know for a fact that you could write the best book in the world. It's not going to get noticed by you not doing anything. So in the beginning we talked about how to amplify your voice. Other ways of doing that is getting with a publisher that has a wide reach, obviously, right? I'm going to use him again because he's an author, and I know he's worked with Terry Dance as well. But we've been working with Christopher Triana since about 2013 with short stories. It wasn't until I would say his The Riverman, right? Gone to See the Riverman and Terry Dance. They have a much wider distribution, right? Meaning they have more people they can hit. They're working with people like Stephen King. They have stuff with Bentley Little, who's another author I've worked with. So when they pick it up and hit it out, boom, it goes, I think, a lot more people. I by no means take away that, these books are good. Obviously, they're good books. But they've got a bigger reach, right? So if I shoot out our newsletter about our book, we're hitting a couple thousand people. I don't know, but maybe they're hitting more like 50,000 people. Can you imagine the difference in that? The reviews jump up a whole lot quicker too. So suddenly that book has got to like 3,000 reviews, where maybe his other books are like the 500, 600 review mark. It's like, whoa, well, is that book really that much better, or was it just the distribution was there? I think this is another thing that authors want to take into effect, or into account when they're looking for publishers and what they want to do. Sometimes it's best to hold out and to go with maybe one that has a wide distribution if you don't want to do it yourself, right? So how are you going to get the word out? Again, it could just be your marketing. So maybe you're not with a huge publisher or a publisher that has a reach. You have to find a way to market that book. So if you've looked it over, you've had objective people take a look at it, it's not the editing, it's not the cover, well then it has to be your reach. Go back to the first thing I talked about. How are you going to amplify your voice? How are you going to get it in places? How are you going to let people know about this book? Because I really firmly believe, I believe this with all of our books, except maybe one or two in the very beginning for Bloodbound books, if people knew about them, they would enjoy them. They would pick it up and they would read it. It's either been the author hasn't written another one after that, they kind of tapered off and don't have more books to choose from. And they look at it from a publisher. Why do I want to go in and spend, I told you earlier, it's only $14, right, to try to get the shipping and
sure.
Influencer. But but if you do that to 30, 40 influencers, why would I do that with an author, even if the book is great, who isn't going to produce anything else? I have nothing else for them to go to. Or if they're not going to bring it to Bloodbound Books, right? If I have multiple books by you, I want to invest more in you, I want to partner with you, and I want to build something together. But if I've just got one book from you, I'm going to give it my all the first time, but if you don't write another one or come to me with another one, it becomes much more difficult for me to shell out hundreds of dollars to try to amplify your voice. So I would say that the author, they've got to find out what the problem was. If it wasn't any of those things we talked about, they've got to amplify their voice, and that's how I think they've got to build their, or re-release their book. And I hope that helped answer it, with the rambling.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate this, SC, and I really hope that, I think that a lot of the people watching this, are probably going to be changing their strategy, perhaps as a result of this, like being able to ask themselves those tough questions and being able to really approach this with more of a realistic viewpoint of what they can expect and some of the more realistic fundamentals that they can be applying to their strategy so that they can meet those expectations that they might have. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome, and I hope that they leave questions on the YouTube or your other stream channels, because I'd be more than happy to jump into just one of these, like, how do we set one of these things up? How do you get that Goodreads thing set up? Because sometimes I can say, hey, do these 3 things, and it feels very overwhelming. It does. So I'm very happy to, let's deeper dive into some of these, but overall, yeah, it just depends on the person. It depends on a lot of factors, but I hope these will help people out on the average.
Cool. Well, thank you very much again, SC. Really appreciate this, and everybody else watching. Thank you guys. Happy writing, and feel free to drop those questions down below so we can help get those books out so we can all read them.